It's because I was adding a picture of her book and it just shut off.
Oh.
So anyways,
So,
we're not going to
okay,
have a picture of your book
we're
on this.
streaming, everybody. Did you start the restream again too?
Yes, I
Okay,
just
we're all
did.
streaming again. Sorry, we had a little glitch in the system. But Kate was saying that in Florida, everything's kind of open. People are pretty much homebound here in Southern California. And I know San Francisco's on lockdown, New York's on lockdown. They were told, here's what I had an issue with. The instructions in San Francisco and New York were to shelter in place. That was the directives they got. And the Post in New York printed an article that said there were going to be 750,000 cases in New York, and that got everybody very upset. And I thought, first of all, how do they go from 1,000 to 750,000 when everyone's already home and all the businesses are shut down? I don't understand how that happens. And then the term shelter in place is not helping the situation. That's a term reserved for an active shooter where you barricade yourself in a room. So my concern has been the panic on top of the extreme actions we're taking. Did you notice that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The day that it was called a pandemic, so many people were like, oh, that means it's time to panic.
Right.
Because the word pan is there. Right? That's
funny.
not what it means. It just means it's global.
I was on TV Monday and I just said, they're going to use the word pandemic to try to scare you and to sell airtime. It just means new virus, widespread. That's all it means. So don't let them use it to scare you. It doesn't mean a thing other than that. Now to be fair, I want to be sure we are just thinking things through out loud. It's a terrible virus. It's highly contagious. It kills lots of people. It kills mostly old people. It does kill young people. Please stop telling me young people die. I know young people die. It's the significant minority that do so. It's rather unusual, but it does happen. And so it's not something we shouldn't be taking very, 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 very seriously. The question is, are we doing everything right? We're just thinking it through. Would that be about the way to say it, Kate?
Yeah, exactly. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do that and share that with your audience, by the way, Dr. Drew. But, one of the things that happened in the past few days that may be why the cases are shooting up is because Quest and LabCorp both within the past week, within a matter of days of each other, and these are the major lab companies across the United States,
right.
Certainly here in Florida and in New York, they developed a code so that now doctors can order the coronavirus test.
Right.
All they need is to have the right swab, like a viral swab. So that was not available
there are criteria.
to doctors before.
There are criteria now. You have to have high level suspicion, lower respiratory infection and evidence of exposure, or you can have to have, I believe it's ICU stay, then you get tested, and some other highly suspicious illness and travel. So those are the conditions on which you get to get tested. Those are the criteria right now. We might do more widespread testing eventually. That's just not the case right now. So yeah, I said we will see a doubling because of that, what you're talking about, which is a backlog of testing that will come through maybe by tomorrow. And so I expect the caseload to double just by virtue of the testing. Would that sound about right to you?
I would think at least, because I remember seeing something like tests and the number of over 100,000. And what we had here in Florida was around 1,000.
Yeah.
So it certainly could skyrocket here. And we're also having some of the drive-throughs, like at the Orange County Convention Center. There's a drive-through. We have no idea of what the capacity is going to be there, but they're setting that up. I thought that was going to be set up today, actually, but it appears not to be just yet. But
well, and
remember, they are currently
at this point only 10%
requiring travel as a criteria.
Right, travel or exposure, unless you're in an ICU, then you get checked. But they don't specify travel where really, and I'm curious about that. But number two, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Oh, is that only 10% of the tests are coming back positive, which I shouldn't say only. 10% of the tests are coming back positive, so 90% are negative.
Right. And so what the huge variable here is what is the denominator, right? Like how so far we think that a lot of these people are like in the highest risk group possible. So that 10% sounds like a lot, but it really does, because it's flu testing during flu season. I don't think I get 10% positive. I have,
right.
Maybe I don't know, maybe close to that, that we're not testing like the people with mild symptoms because these tests are too precious.
Right.
So that's another factor that is kind of skewing the mortality too, because we don't have just any stats on how many people are just mostly okay with this stuff. We're testing the most severe people, and of course, the mortality rate is going to be higher with that.
Right.
So it's another important thing to understand. So that's why a lot of doctors are talking about, well, let's take a look until we have better data here, until we have better data anywhere. Seems like South Korea has been the model, right? Is that what you understood, Dr. Drew, where they had 10,000 people tested?
They had widespread testing, but they had a ton of false positives, though. Apparently, they had a lot of false positives because they were doing a certain test that wasn't so accurate. But okay, yeah, it's still a good model. It's still a good model. And I'll tell you the number at this minute in South Korea is 8,500 cases, 91 deaths.
Wow. Okay. So, so like the scary part is what we're hearing is that young people can get it and it can kill them too.
Yeah.
And what we don't have is the information that we need, which is, okay, well, is it really only the people with pneumonia that are dying? And my guess as a doctor would be, of course, because what kills people isn't pneumonia with this disease. It's something called adult respiratory distress syndrome, which is where your lungs get leaky and you have a whole bunch of fluids seeping into your lungs.
And then the air sacs don't work. Then the areas of the lung that exchange oxygen just stop working. You can't get oxygen into your blood. I've even seen them using ECMO and stuff too to try to get people through this. But yeah, ARDS is a big mess.
And it seems like you have to have pneumonia first to get the ARDS, and we don't know for how long you have to have it, and we don't know the relative percentages of people with pneumonia who ultimately go on to get ARDS. I was trying to get some of that data, and you can't get it by age group, which is what you really need.
Right.
I was seeing it as like 40% in one study, but they didn't break it down into the different ages or comorbidities. So, there's just so much information missing, and that seems strange. It's like they've had this going on for like a month or two, and intensely in both Italy and lots of parts of Asia. So why haven't the statisticians been kind of staying up night looking at the data, trying to dig in with the different diagnoses and just cutting and slicing the data in as many ways as possible to get us a little bit more answers?
Right. I think people are doing that, but I suspect they're going to have to get peer reviewed and published before they're going to speak up, right?
That's actually true, right? Like normally you're not even allowed to say anything about your data if it's going to be published.
Right.
Because then they don't want to publish it. It's like, oh, well, then we kind of like lost the value of the publication or something like that.
And
hopefully,
to be fair,
that won't be such an issue.
Right. And to be fair, China's not exactly the most open, society for access to this kind of thing. I mean, we really don't know what went on there. Again, I want to remind everyone I'm talking to Dr. Kate Shanahan. She's famous for the Fat Burn Fix. Did I get that right? The book?
That's the right book.
That's the right book.
Fix.
You know,
also
it's
somewhat famous for deep nutrition.
Yeah, I was going to say only deep nutrition is on your website on the homepage. They got to put the Fat Burn Fix up there. I'm
way behind. This whole virus thing has got me behind too.
You know what? You know what happens after you look around your homepage? This window comes up and the whole thing darkens and it says the new book is the Fat Burn Fix. So there you go. It just came up. Isn't that funny?
She's also a medical doctor.
Yes, she's a family practitioner. She's a geneticist, a fine biochemist, and an excellent family physician. And she posted something on Twitter this morning that I thought would get her killed because people hate thinking this through. They seem to hate it. Just anyone who just out loud tries to think through, are we doing the right things? Somehow that's anathema to what? I don't know what, because we need to do that. We need to think things through very carefully. See, what I've been trying to get people to understand, whenever a medical provider makes an intervention, even if it's come into my office, whatever intervention we do, stay home, isolate if you're sick, it has consequences. It's not just using the medication that has consequences. Every time we make a recommendation, there is a risk-benefit or risk-reward ratio that we're trying to figure out, because our call is to do no harm. So when we do anything, we always have to think through, what are we doing to, having now done that, that might harm people, and if the harm is even equivalent or more than what our recommendation is benefiting, well, then we got to talk amongst our peers, and that's why I brought Dr. Kate in.
And that requires looking at the big picture, right? Like it's not just for that individual or their family, it's the whole society. So if all of a sudden we're telling everybody to stay home and businesses are going to be shut down. Tom Colicchio, who is a huge TV personality chef, he was on the radio yesterday saying that he thought 75% of restaurants that are forced to close are not going to be able to open again because restaurants are operating on a minute margin. And, they can't afford to pay rent if they don't have income coming in day after day. They can't afford to keep people on staff. People are being laid off. People are losing their health insurance because they're being laid off. They're applying to unemployment, and it's going to bankrupt the state. We don't have a way of paying for all these people who are applying for unemployment.
Right.
And, the mass transport and on the East Coast is like empty ridership, and all these businesses they're always on like the verge of barely squeaking by. And now they're like losing $1 billion every couple of days.
Right.
So what's going to happen if New York doesn't have mass transit? What's going to happen in DC? So these are the huge consequences, the big picture consequences of one little decision, which seems like a small thing to say, okay, everybody just stay at home or, hold in place or self-quarantine.
Yeah.
But it seems like it makes sense, to those of us who are lucky enough to be able to sometimes work from home, or we don't have to, we're not living paycheck to paycheck. It seems like, oh yeah, of course, that's the decision to make. And all of the people that are in the CDC are likely to be in that scenario themselves personally, where it's just like, well, I could work from home, and I'm not sure that they have consulted with the right people to figure out what's going to happen as a society. And I'm sure the systems are not even in place for them to do that. But that's a big missing chunk here now as we start shutting everything down.
I feel like the federal government seems to be paying attention to that. I mean, because they keep coming up with plans to support the economy and support the individuals who are losing their work. But I think the tougher putt is not getting us through this next week or two, but how do we ramp up? How do we get people back at work without causing another outbreak? That's the part I haven't heard anybody talk about. So I would like, and I'm going to have you purely speculate, Kate, this is just peer-to-peer stuff. By the end of next week, what is a number for you that would tell you we're in pretty good shape? And then we'll talk about how then to ramp up if we get that number.
Like if it's only gone up by maybe 10% or something like that. Right.
Well, let's say I've said that if we're at 20,000 by the end of this week, I think we're in pretty good shape. I think that's pretty good, at least for this week. But we don't know exactly where we are on the graph, so 20 could go to 100 very quickly if we're in a bad slope. But where if we have enough data points by the end of next week, and what number do you think you could say to yourself? Because I'd like to have these in my mind as a way of reassuring myself, so it's not just the raw numbers that are looking scary. You think in terms of what they mean ahead of time. See, to me, if we're at 40, 50,000 at the end of the next week, that's pretty good. In a country of 350 million people, that's damn good, no?
Yeah, that's pretty great, especially so if you run the numbers real quick, roughly, I'd say, I think it was something like, the highest estimate might be 20% of people are getting pneumonias, and maybe 10% of those at the absolute most might need to be in an intensive care unit. Yep. I would think we have that much capacity. Oh,
not only that, I got to tell you, I know in California, the governor's preparing exceptionally well for excess capacity. I mean, he is really doing a number. So we are not going to be in trouble here in California. It's just he is doing an excellent job preparing. And my sense is New York is doing similarly. And we are the states, let's be fair, that are likely to get into trouble. This is where all the concentration is. This is where all the virus is coming from. This is where it could get bad. And this is where we have limited bed space and limited ICUs and limited ventilators. And we just need to be prepared what to do if that gets exceeded. That's exactly what they did not do in Italy. That did not happen in Italy. That's why we're not going to be like Italy.
And one of the things that I think is probably irritating people about my Facebook post is that I brought up the idea of, isn't it okay if some people are okay with like dying? This is the thing that I feel like what's making us all be so extreme about it. Like if we think about the big picture here, the vast majority of people who are getting sick and dying are the elderly people. And I've spoken about a handful of people in their 70s and 80s. And, you know, the ones who I've spoken with are, granted, they're not the healthiest, but they've universally said, I'm okay if I get sick and die. You know, I don't expect to live forever. And these are people who also have something called an advance directive in place. And I think it might be helpful to start talking about advanced directives and what really do we want? Do you want to be put on a ventilator?
What do these? Right. What do these?
Nursing home?
So let me soften what you're saying. What do these people? Let's say 80 and 90-year-olds. What do they want? Most of my 80 and 90-year-olds know they're going to get pneumonia and things like that someday, and they have been explicit they don't want to go on ventilators in my practice. So that's kind of so what you're saying. Those conversations should be had ahead of time. Right? Wouldn't that be about right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's pretty much all I'm saying on my post is that now's really a good time. If you haven't had that conversation with someone that you love that's in their 80s and 90s, especially if they're frail, please do, because and have your mind open, right? A lot of people it's a hard conversation to have.
Well, it's weird because generally generally, say 85 and above, it's often been considered cruel to put them on ventilators, right? I mean, that's always been the ethical guidelines. It's being cruel to put them on a ventilator. We seem to have shifted that in this crisis to, we got to get them through. Is that accurate?
That's how I feel. Exactly. It's like, how many of these people were even asked, right? Because a lot of folks in nursing homes, I know you're supposed to have an advance directive in a nursing home, but I know that a lot of people don't.
But they might have had, this is high level stuff we're talking about. These are just two physicians talking about how to navigate somebody who's critically ill in their advanced ages when often there are directives in place. Sometimes you'll see, here's the thing, as somebody that uses advanced directives all the time, what you'll usually get is, look, if there's no hope, do not put me on a ventilator. But if there's a hope I can get through, put me on, right? And that's kind of the situation we're in with these illnesses. It looks like we can get people through, so we're trying to do that. So that's, I think, why the advanced directives are not having people not get intubated. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes total sense. Now, what I'm trying to consider is that if we do get to this point, you know, what we're doing right now is we're trying to do something called flatten the curve, right? So we don't want to have a mass influx of, you know, so 20,000, then we have 100,000 cases the next week. That's a curve that's going to have a sharp peak and then go down really quickly, presumably. And so what they're trying to do is make the peak be much less high. Of course, it might last longer and go down a lot slower. But the reason for that is because we have a capacity. We only have a certain capacity with our intensive care units. And this is how we want to keep people alive in the intensive care units. There's really not a lot of other care that we can deliver right now. So
supportive care. Although again, some of the antivirals are looking good. Chloroquine's looking good. I mean, things are really moving very quickly. So we may have some real effective treatments where people aren't getting into the ICU situation.
Right. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is, as a society, we are so afraid of raising the subject of allowing our elderly folks to talk about how they feel about continuing life. And what if it comes to it where, okay, now we are at that threshold. We've exceeded this threshold, at least in this town or in this state. Our intensive care units are full, right? So this is just an imaginary scenario. We are nowhere near there right now.
It's not going to happen, everybody. That's not going to happen. So you're painting an ethical dilemma, just a theoretical thought experiment. Okay, right?
It's exactly that.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. And so let's say we're there. Would we have the have benefited if we'd already had this conversation with our elderly folks where they say, you know what? Okay, if there's plenty of people, plenty of ventilators. Yeah, do everything for me. But if there's not, hey, you know what? I am willing to sacrifice my life potentially for the younger generation, right? I mean, that is a really true. This is a dilemma. It's an ethical like place that we are not at right now. But if we got there, I would like to have had that conversation if we ever did get there, because what a waste it would be to have arrived at that point without even asking people. Okay, I give up my place in the ICU. I'm going to hand it over to somebody. Maybe you could designate it to someone else in your family or something like that. I don't know, but it seems like
And again,
the
this
kind
is
of
not
thing
happening.
that,
This is a thought
maybe not for
experiment.
this pandemic.
It's a thought experiment, everybody. Don't freak out. She's just talking about
It's a total thought
thinking
experiment.
about these things. So,
And yeah, I wanna have a conversation because I find that people in their 80s and 90s, they want to talk about this way more than their children. Let them talk about it. So when I start talking about it with them, they're like, "Oh my God, yeah," and I'm over it, but I feel bad telling my children that I'd be okay if something happens to me and I don't wake up tomorrow. I'd be totally okay, but I feel bad telling my children that. I feel like I've failed them, or it's like I send the message that I don't want to be with them. And that's really a conversation that I feel that us as a society here in the United States, we are not good at that. I lived in Hawaii for 11 years, and there were a lot of Buddhists there. And there was such a dramatic difference between the way they treated their sick elderly folks when they were Buddhists than any other religion that was there in Hawaii. They were calm, they were collected, they were accepting. They weren't like weeping and panicking. They loved their elders, but they spent time with them and they cared for them. But it wasn't like, oh my God, we got to fight against this to the last scrap of breath. It was totally different. And I feel like we could use that in this country as a whole, certainly now, but certainly for the next pandemic, because this isn't going to be the last one, is it?
no, this may be, who knows? I mean,
And Grandma
viruses,
doesn't want a recession. That's for sure.
viruses are really good at
Grandma.
mutating. Let me say a couple bit of news. There's a 34-year-old young man died recently, and now the story's coming out that he was at Disney World. So there's concern that there may have been spread out there in Florida where you are. Also, I want to review what you should do if you are sick. There's a lot of confusion about how long to stay in self-quarantine and that kind of thing. So let me give you some of the latest data from the CDC. The time since the onset of symptoms, I would say primarily fever, at least 3 days have passed since recovery defined as resolution of fever. At least 7 days have passed since symptoms first appeared, right? So it's got to be at least 7 days or 3 days after the fever resolved, provided 7 days has passed. Like if the fever resolves in 2 days, you don't get to go out in 5 days. You still have to wait the full 7 days. So it's 3 days after fever, provided 7 days have passed. That's the. There's also a test-based strategy where people will continue to test people who are shedding virus to make sure they're no longer shedding. That's obviously the most objective way to do it. And people who are directed to care for themselves at home, they say resolution of fever without fever-reducing medications, improvement of respiratory symptoms, negative results. Oh, in the COVID assay, at least how are they going to get those swabs? This is interesting. Negative results of emergency use authorized FDA molecular assay, at least 2 consecutive nasal swabs that are negative 24 hours apart. Do you know how they're going to get that, Kate?
They're going to have to go to their doctor's office because, like right now, even though Quest and LabCorp can run the test, they cannot perform the test.
Right.
So the person who actually collects the swab specimen, sticks the cotton ball in the nose, that has to be either the doctor's office or one of these drive-through locations. And so far in Orlando, I've been looking for when are our resources going to pop up? Where are we going to have all this stuff? And I haven't found anything. And I think one of the things that is really got to be frustrating for people out there is that I called up the a couple doctors' offices, and I went to their website, and some of them here, actually most of them here, are like, we can't handle this. We're not ready for this. Call the state health department. And then you go to the state health department and you look at their website, and the first thing they say is call your doctor. And you get on the phone
Right.
tree, they tell you a few symptoms, but then they say call your doctor.
Right.
So right here in Florida, we're caught in an endless loop.
Where you can't, they're calling you and you can't get the test.
Yeah, right. Or the average person whose doctor's office isn't ready to help them, they can't go to the health department either. So there's
Right.
really like nothing.
Apparently, you can also dial
So I think that's a big part of
211. There's a sort of emergency line out here that's set up. I don't know if it's still in Florida, but you can dial 211, and they allegedly have information and instructions there. Boy, it's really and
we have a lot of.
Go ahead.
We do have the information, but we don't have like the actual like, okay, here's where to get the test, or here's how to get tested, or anything concrete. It's just stay home or go to the hospital, and it's kind of left up to people to figure out which one of those two they ought to do.
Now, again, people are on Restream. Dr. Shanahan is not saying we let people die. She is not saying that. She is not saying don't intervene. She is not saying any of the things that you think you're hearing. She's saying, why don't we have these conversations, preferably in calmer times, when it's the whole field of palliative care, it's called, where at certain ages we start talking to our patients about what they want to do, and a lot of people don't understand the instructions they're kind of going over. And this is the biggest problem I see, is that people will say, I don't want to ever get on a breathing machine, and I say, well, what if there's a chance I can get you through? Well, if it's a low chance, well, what's a low chance? It's hard to tell starting out. Is it 50-50? Is it 30-70? It's hard for me to tell when you first put someone on a ventilator. Maybe it's just going to be overnight and you'll be off in the morning. Day 3, it's a whole different prognosis. In the meantime, we have caused you a lot of suffering. And this is all the kinds of conversations that are really hard for people. And I get it. Again, I think, Kate, that's part of the reason we don't have it. It's easy to go, if there's no chance of meaningful recovery, forget about it. I think we all agree with that. It's the zone where we could get you through this. I mean, what do people, she's not saying 2 years of life if you're 90 is not worth it. She didn't say that. She said, does the person want us to do that, is what she was asking, right? Wouldn't that be about right, Kate?
Exactly. And now, now is the time of panic, but what else, we're quarantined at home. We should be thinking about these things, and we certainly can talk about them. And I think at the very least, raising these kinds of issues can flush out the people who do feel strongly that they don't want anything. And I just want to give courage and give hope and give permission for anyone who does feel that way to say so, because nobody else is giving people that permission, really. I don't hear it anywhere. I don't hear it from spiritual leaders. I don't hear it from political leaders, and I don't hear it very often from doctors, unless they work in palliative care, and in which case they're kind of like me, always on a rampage about we've got to talk to people about this, because we can't make the assumption. It's kind of a kind of abuse if we make the assumption, and then when somebody is unconscious, we just attack them with our medical system. And, and what, that we don't know, say they don't recover very well, then we don't know, how long should they stay on the respirator? And then families have to have these extremely difficult conversations because nobody made any plans. And, people blame each other, and it's no good. I mean, death is always hard, but when it is something that is taboo to talk about, and then finally you haven't talked about it, there's all this guilt that comes into play. People truly blame each other for all kinds of things for no reason when stuff like this happens. So let's just plan ahead and just give our elderly people the space to talk about how they really feel, and be aware that they do have this strong feeling of they're afraid to tell you that they are okay with dying peacefully in their sleep from some kind of infection, because they feel like it's a way of saying, I don't want to be with you. That's not how they feel. In my experience, that's nobody has ever felt that way. That's not what it means. It just means that they are tired and they don't want to fight.
And a lot of people want everything done, and we will do it. That simple.
And they don't want to be on a ventilator.
And they usually communicate that.
Yeah. And then we do it on their behalf. You're just saying it's important to talk about. I keep saying it's important to have this with psychiatric care, that we need an advanced directive for psychiatric care when a psychiatric diagnosis is made. What do you want me to do when you decompensate, when your brain is not working right? So really what we're talking about oftentimes here is how do you want me to represent your interest when you're not there to speak up, or your brain isn't working right where you can speak up meaningfully? And we don't do that with psychiatric care either.
Yeah, it's so strange. We're so like oriented around interventions and pills and stuff like this, and just like communication is one of the most important and best things that we can do. And so, whenever I've worked in a hospital, I take the time to sit down with the whole family that's there and say, okay, have you guys talked about this before? And if there's like dead silence and it's super awkward, I acknowledge that. You got to acknowledge that, and say, it's okay if you don't want us to do everything, because a lot of folks have been gotten really indoctrinated by what they hear in the media, and certain media especially, that if you don't believe that if you don't keep somebody alive as long as possible because now we have this technology that we absolutely have to use it, there's a large part of the population that feels like what that means is it is wrong to not use it. And okay, so
it sounds like
really
it sounds like this is
that, and they're like so relieved.
But it sounds like this is something that you've been dealing with for a long time. This is not unique to this situation.
It's absolutely not. I mean, anytime you have somebody in the hospital in the intensive care, and you don't know what's going on, or they didn't have an advance directive, you have to have these conversations. And they even if the person recovers, at least you have the conversation so that next time you feel a lot better, and you feel better about what you're doing too, right? It's you're operating in the dark if you don't know how the person feels, and if you don't allow them to have that space to tell you how they feel.
Okay, we're getting
talk about each other with each other.
All right, let's a question. If you guys have questions on the Restream, please put them in here now, and that's the time to do that. Yeah, Catherine says, when you have a ton of people gathering on the beach, ignoring social distancing, what is important right now? Those hordes have dispersed. Correct? You're in Florida. My understanding is that was 2 days of denial that they got their act together following. And is that accurate, or are they still congregating in Florida on the beaches?
Not to my knowledge. Like, yes, I think pretty much people are staying at home. I mean, I haven't gone anywhere near the beaches, and I actually have been treating patients. So I haven't really been able to follow the news as much as I would like, but I can tell you that the roads are, the commute has been a whole lot better. The roads are very, much less. There's hardly anybody coming here. Disney World shut down. So, so there are people who own condos at the beaches, but there's definitely not like the usual like spring break kind of parties happening at all.
Right. Good. And the restaurants and bars are open there in Florida, or are they closed like in California, New York?
The last that I heard, they are considering reducing capacity. Like you have to do 50% of what your normal capacity is, and no more than that.
Okay. And are people cooperating?
Yeah, they're still selling liquor.
It's funny in New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco, people are in a panic. There's just straight up panic, and people are staying in for the most part. I mean, the freeways are empty. It's really kind of uncanny and spooky when you go around town.
Yeah, the same here. It's I looked at the pictures of like Times Square and everything, and it is a little freaky. But and of course, and that makes you feel even more scared, right? When you see like, oh gosh, this really feels like something that's never happened before, and hopefully it'll never happen again. But there was a while where England, I think they've switched over the last few days, but for a while England was really doing a very minimum of. Well, they were doing social distancing, but they weren't really shutting down.
They were going for herd immunity. They were going to try to let it affect 60% of the population, but the concern then became they would then infect the rest of Europe, who was not so up with that policy.
So then they've subsequently decided, okay, well, we'll just do what everyone else is doing.
Shut it down.
Is my understanding. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
So can I give out a little plug for somebody?
Wait,
that I
one
think is-
second, Chris, because I'm going to lose it. Chris has just announced that the FDA just approved Plaquenil for treatment. Now, I don't know if that's a rumor or if he's summarizing what was said at the press conference where they were saying they were going to approve and fast track it. But there is very fast movement on Plaquenil, sometimes used with azithromycin at the same time. What's that, Susan?
So you were talking about restaurants earlier.
Yeah.
In New York City, a lot of them are closing, but we're in an area in Chelsea, Hudson Yard area, and Chef Jose Andre is turning some of his restaurants into community kitchens, and he's handing out food to people that need it.
Yeah.
And nobody's showing up. So if you're in the area and you need food and you need, somebody who needs assistance, especially an elderly person, you might check out Little Spain in Hudson Yards. They're
Great.
trying to help the community.
Excellent. Although they're not being allowed. See, the thing about New York is I think they put a shelter in place thing on, so you can't move around.
And I know that the grocery stores are all stocked again,
Yep.
and things are getting better
Yep.
that way. But they still have to keep 6 feet distance between them, obviously.
And again, let me restate, as I state all the time, we are following the directions of the CDC, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is our North Star. Whatever he tells us, we do. He has great judgment on these things. But I guarantee you the kinds of discussions that Kate and I are having now are the kinds of discussions he's having with other infectious disease professionals at the CDC, which is risk-benefit analysis constantly. And this is his recommendations based on his risk-benefit analysis. I'm going to go with him to the mat. I've said that from the beginning, and I will continue to do so. It doesn't mean we can't have conversations about what we're doing, though, in the meantime, which I find bizarre and it's uniquely un-American.
True that.
Yeah, exactly. Free speech, right? But it's a taboo subject. It's a difficult subject, but it doesn't mean that, it shouldn't be talked about.
I mean, it's depressing.
It's awful. It's all awful. This whole situation is awful. Let's state for what it is.
We're all in mourning right now.
Yeah, I think we're mourning the world we knew. We were mourning, we lost the world we knew. We're trying to move into this new world, and we're struggling to do so. And I want to make sure the new world is not damaged by what we've done to create it. In other words, we could really do more harm than the virus itself.
Somebody
easily.
said not stocked in Northern California. So probably what I heard was New York was getting restocked. I'm only in California and New York, and New York seems to be, very resilient. They have to have groceries. But it's, I hope that this continues for everybody.
That the food supply, apparently the food supply is not in jeopardy. The supply chain for food is not in jeopardy. It's, we hear from everyone that works in those industries that it's going to be fine. The problem is the orderliness with which people go to the grocery stores. We have people in Southern California, we have people stealing out of women's bags as they leave the grocery store.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Well, that's desperation. Definitely.
Yeah.
Pretty hard.
So I think also by next week, we will have real clarity for sure on the use of Plaquenil, which again, what I'm reading shows a marked reduction in viral production. And we have at least 4 different mechanism of actions that really look promising. And some, for the more severe cases, antiviral combinations. Seeing lots of data about that come out here and there. And those things are for people that are really in trouble with the adult respiratory distress syndrome and pneumonias. We might be able to pull them out before getting into that extreme situation. It's worth, again, the risk-benefit analysis. These are very powerful medications, lots of side effects. Worth it if somebody's going down that road into ARDS.
Absolutely. And both hydroxychloroquine, which is Plaquenil, and chloroquine that have been studied. So hopefully shortly after the Plaquenil is approved, maybe the chloroquine will be investigated, because my guess is that these drugs have not been used even for malaria all that much in a long time, because as they were, very popular for malaria, but then there's been a lot of resistance. So I don't know what the stock is or how long it would take to get it up and running.
That's interesting.
But,
that's why my friend, I think, got a whole ton of it. But I actually trained in a time when Plaquenil was a common medication. So I've used lots of it in my training and early in my career. And it's a easily tolerated medication. It's very easy to use. I was using 200 milligrams a day typically. Now we're talking about 200 twice a day for a while. But it's like aspirin. I got to tell you, it's not a problematic medication at all. Sometimes a little nausea, sometimes a little funny, kind of confusion-y kind of feeling, but that's it.
Right. Supposedly, I remember that we were supposed to have our patients go see an eye doctor every year if they were on it daily, every day.
Corneal
for
deposits.
Years.
Corneal deposits.
Once a year, they see an eye doctor.
Yeah, they had corneal deposits, and that was the reason for that. All right, so Kate, let's go switch to FAT for a second. You put have a review up on your website about FAT, the documentary. How'd you like it?
Oh, it was awesome. I love the way Vinny kind of just lays out the story about, how we started getting afraid of it and how we don't think about it logically at all. That's a common theme here. Sometimes we just don't think logically, and it gets us into trouble. But yeah, the documentary was a really good story, and I loved all the different doctors and practitioners that he interviewed, because as a doctor myself, when I started this about 10 years ago, I was really an outlier, saying, butter's not so bad. But now I'm just so happy that there's more people that are on my team, basically, so I can point my patients to, a whole team of doctors. It doesn't just seem like me, a raving lunatic screaming in the field, as well as like pointing to other doctors, because we are kind of herd animals, right? So hopefully the herd can grow that larger and larger. So we stop telling our patients that, butter is bad and we need to watch our cholesterol levels as opposed to our triglyceride levels, which is what we really should be watching.
Right. And for me on this diet, I, by the way, had several different, I've been on it about 2 years now, and my triglycerides have never been lower. They're 75. And my HDL's never been higher. And I'm on a statin for LDL, and that's been pegged at 70. But tell them why the triglycerides are important.
So it seems like triglycerides are what clogs our arteries. We hear about cholesterol, especially LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, being what builds up as plaque in our arteries. But way back in the 1920s and 30s, people used to do a lot of autopsies where somebody would die of a heart attack, and they would take it to a pathology doctor, and they would just kind of cut them open and see exactly what happened, what's going on. They wanted to understand this disease, because heart attacks were extremely rare. Mm-hmm. Cardiologists could go entire careers, actually, at that time, and not even see a single heart attack. So,
wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It wasn't until Einstein's heart attack that it even became, in the 40s, that it even became part of the national conversation or thought process.
Wow.
But so what they found when they did these autopsies was they would slice open the chest, take the heart, and start looking at the coronary arteries, and they found that there were these deposits in there. They didn't know what they were made out of. It was kind of a blend of fat and a lot of fat and a little bit of other substances and cholesterol, sometimes even some calcium. And then they found that there were all different kinds of plaques. Some of them were soft, some of them were hard, and they had a different chemical makeup. And they would analyze the makeup just by scooping it out, like as you would with a mini ice cream scoop, and putting it in a centrifuge and spinning it really, really fast to see how things separated out. And they found that the layer of material that was most correlated with having just died from a heart attack, not just having plaque and not having died from a heart attack, but you died from being kicked in the chest by a horse or something totally different, that the heart attack victim had more of this very soft plaque that was made almost entirely of triglyceride, not cholesterol. And so we've known this for a super duper long time, 100 years almost now. And yet we still focus on the LDL and the HDL cholesterol. And I really think a huge reason that we do that is partly because we've got medications that will lower your LDL cholesterol. And, why we don't focus more on the triglycerides and the diet, because diet works so easily to lower your triglycerides. It's like a no-brainer. You can have massive changes. You can have a normal triglyceride level for the cutoff value is 150. And you could have a number of like 500. I've even seen them in the thousands. And you change your diet, you straighten up, and within a matter of weeks, the numbers will plummet. They'll like be slashed in half. And if you go 3 months, you can go from somebody who had like 1,000 to somebody who's just like right around normal if you do the right thing. And so so the triglyceride number, not your LDL number or your HDL number, seems to be what most correlates with having a heart attack or a stroke, or having those kind of like deadly plaques, deadly fat in your arteries. I think we don't talk about it much, but like the language really has been driving our thought here. Like we talk about plaque in the arteries. Well, what's plaque? Well, doctor says cholesterol. So we've been all focused on cholesterol, LDL, HDL, but really it's fat. It's fat that builds up in our arteries. We eat too much stuff. Our body fat tries to stuff it in the body fat, but actually there's this thing called insulin resistance. And when you're insulin resistant, your body fat can't store fat anymore, and it kind of spills out into your arteries. And the people who have that happening more often have more plaque in their arteries, especially these soft, very fatty, fresh plaques. Over time, the plaques actually harden. It's kind of like a scab that the body forms so that it's much more stable and less harmful. But when you have insulin resistance, you have a lot of these soft fatty plaques all over your body, and it comes
Dr. Feldman
from the
was
fact
saying
that your body fat's not working.
Feldman
right.
has kind of an interesting theory that it's the original injury is related to the sort of the insulin resistance, and that this is the body trying to heal that injury with the fat deposition. Like you said, it's a scab almost.
Yeah. So the insulin resistance causes the fat in your body fat to kind of leak out when it shouldn't. And it also makes it hard for...
I wanted to make some point before I wrap up. Was that last time I talked to you, said, when it really stayed with me, is that we don't have enough time in between meals to actually metabolize our own adipose tissue, our own fat. And that was a really interesting insight, I thought.
Yeah, because if you want to burn your body fat, you have to go from the mode that you are right after a meal, which is build new body fat.
Yep.
You got to put all that in storage.
Yep.
And that process, takes time, right? But if you're eating every 3 hours or every 2 hours, all you're ever doing is storing, and you really don't give your body fat a lot of time to actually get released in your bloodstream so you can use it and burn it, unless you do like extreme, things like really a lot of exercise. Then you can manage to, metabolize enough calories where you are finally releasing your body fat. But just changing the timing of your meals so that you're not eating every 2 hours, but instead just have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then ultimately maybe skip a meal. Just doing that is a great way to start burning your body fat.
Back to the virus very quickly. There's somebody on Restream saying that off topic, but wondering what the pollution levels are going to be with the world on standstill, which is a great question. What's going to happen to the global warming? What's going to happen to those sorts of things we've been very worried about, and we might learn something about those things as a result of the global shutdown, or maybe it'll dial us back to the point where we can sort of start to recover. Also, swine flu, the H1N1, he says, wasn't that as bad? Millions infected, hundreds of thousands of dead worldwide. It was different. The H1N1 killed 40 to 60-year-olds primarily. It infected 1 billion people. This was our last pandemic in 2009. And people don't remember that one, interestingly, because we didn't have such a huge reaction to it. We did a lot of stuff. CDC did a bunch of stuff, but we didn't go this far. And so something to keep in mind. And it killed 500,000 people, primarily 40 to 60-year-olds. So interesting. Were you thinking about that also when you were thinking about how we should be approaching this epidemic, this pandemic, Kate?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, because I totally fundamentally don't understand why it's so much more terrifying all of a sudden to have, an illness that can kill you when, every single year we have a flu. But the number of people that have died from the flu, I think, is already this year is still higher than the number of people that have died from this infection.
Number of flu deaths in the United States is 18,000. Number of corona deaths at this moment is 157. So it's
right, and so it's just like we've given ourselves permission to panic and be completely irrational around this particular virus. I don't get it, but I think
it's the contagion.
Reframing is important.
It's the contagion and the virulence. I'm sure that's it, and again, people that whose job it is to keep people safe are thinking it's worth it. So we're gonna follow them. Wait a minute. Gavin, that's not true about Newsom.
It's just so sad the way that it's bringing down the economy and our whole lifestyle.
Well, that's what Kate was suggesting. She's just discussing how
think
we
of
should.
the elderly that lost all their money and they're trying to live on it,
Yeah.
for the rest of their lives.
By the way, I had H1N1. It was brutal. It was awful. It's terrible. So I don't really welcome this one. I'm sure I do poorly with viruses. But Kate, we're gonna wrap things up. Thank you for spending a little time with me. I hope your thinking out loud has been received the way it was intended. Everybody, I mean, she is not talking about making Sophie's Choice. That's not what she's talking about. And do not interpret the conversation as that. Then you have no business thinking about it if that's where you go with this. She was talking about how we all approach end of life as an individual and as family. That's it. That's all she was talking about. And then the context of that in this horrible setting that we're all in, and how it makes this conversation weird and difficult and that much more intense. So that's what we're talking about. And just, again, thinking through what we're doing. Are there better ways to do this? Because we got to think about it, because when we decide it's time to get back to work, and if there's another little outbreak, we better have best practices thought through, not just one practice, go to the mat, that's it exclusively, unless that's what we have to do again, which seems, I don't know, it seems like we could think it through a little better than that. But Kate, again, the book is what? Go ahead.
She's like...
It seems like in medicine, there's like this a calculation that we do. The name of it is escaping me right now, but like it's the amount of money we are spending per life saved, right? So with some of the preventative treatments that we have.
Well, hey, the good news is, I'll tell you what, the good news is no one does that stuff better than us, and we're going to have tons of resource available for people that get into trouble. We just have it. We got lots of it, and this is the time we're going to use it. So okay, so we'll do it.
Thanks for all the people on Restream that are watching and saying nice things, and we're sorry if it was uncomfortable, if we triggered anybody, but that wasn't our intention. We're just having a conversation.
And Kate, the book is The Fat Burn Fix. And anywhere else you want people to go? Your website?
I have a website called fatburnfix.com. So, and if you go there, you can actually download a PDF and find out how well you are burning your body fat on a scale of 0 to 100.
Somebody's asking, does the AIDS virus medication provide any protection? Yes, there's a lot of study going on with that right now. And Ebola virus other antiviral medicines are being studied actively. And I hear rumors of good things, but we've got to see the peer-reviewed data before we really know whether stuff we should be using was worth the risk. Right now, we do supportive care very, very well, and that's what we're going to do until we have specific data that tells us we should be doing something different.
Yeah.
And again, Kate, your website isn't it drkate.com? I just fell off it for some reason.
Yes, Dr. Kate, drcate.com. That's my my standard website. And for the book, there's a Fat Burn Fix, because a Fat Burn Fix is a little easier to remember and sometimes to spell. Doctors it's DRC, but it's Kate with a C. ATE.com.
And as we sit here, we have 11,200 cases with 157 people that have succumbed to it. Those are, it's awful, but we're holding the line here pretty well. I
think there's more cases than we know.
Well, of course there are.
Because we don't have testing kits. We can't
No. Don't. We can estimate what we're gonna what this number means. It should be higher based on the cases that are the tests that are outstanding that have yet to come in. At 10%, we have many tens of thousands of cases that come in. So we should expect to see a doubling of this. That is going to be a sudden pop that may or may not be sustained. That's the question after we see the initial pop of all the testing coming in. As Kate and I were saying, if we're at 20,000 at the end of the week, 20,000 on Monday, or even near that, we are doing pretty well. It's still horrible for people to get sick.
Internationally, right?
No, that's just here.
In the whole world?
That's just here in the United States, out of 350 million people. Now, I'm certain we have at least 3 times that many people out there walking around with it, which is why if you're sick, the unknown factor, the wild card is who is an asymptomatic carrier, which is why we're practicing social distancing out there, and we will continue to do so. But if the numbers look good, I want people to stay optimistic if these numbers look good. And I'm hoping that Anthony Fauci will give his own interpretation of what numbers are good and what numbers are not. And when we should be more concerned and really have to stay isolated.
When are we going to get to go back to work?
Well, that's what these numbers are going to start to tell us, and that's what Kate was sort of musing about. What price do we literally, what price do you pay for aggression? How aggressive versus how being aggressive against this versus how much damage you do. Kate, thanks so much. No doubt I'll talk to you again soon. Okay.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. Drew. It's always a pleasure.
You got it. Take care. Talk to you soon. And everybody else, we have Adam Carolla in here on Sunday.
Sorry, I couldn't put the banner up because it shut down my computer.
Me and Adam for an hour and a half on Sunday at 3 o'clock Pacific. If you guys have not seen the Adam and or listened to the Adam and Dr. Drew show, we'll get Adam's never-ending stream of thoughts about where we are in the world. And Sunday will be there'll be an interesting time on Sunday. We'll be sort of on a cusp with this data on where we are in this infection.
And we'll be taking your calls as well.
And we will take calls on that day.
And we're going to be back tomorrow with Tom Green.
Oh, great.
Who
Tom
has
Green.
a few questions, but I think you should answer more questions on Restream.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
You guys, there was a lot of listening and not a lot of questioning today.
Yeah, I know. A lot of angry people because they didn't like it, but we're sorry. We're not trying to upset you, but these are all real things.
Well, hopefully they'll be thinking about it anyway, and then at least if they're angry enough, they can at least start a conversation about how horrible I am, and then they can.
I think most of this
maybe at least start talking about the topic.
It's too much of a fog of war right now. But when we get through all this, I think people hopefully will start having conversations, about what they want and how much they want. And
well, we love you, Kate. We understand, and we're right behind you.
All right, guys, we will wrap it up, and we'll see you tomorrow.